Alrighty, well, good afternoon and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our presentation in celebration of Juneteenth. I just have a few housekeeping items to go over before I turn it over to Juliet from the Thomas Edison State University's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council, who will do the official welcome and introduction. We will be taking your questions at the end of Dr. Nobles' presentation, but please feel free to submit them at any time using the Q&A or the chat feature in the Zoom dashboard. As always, there's a survey available at the end of the program. If you have time, please complete the survey. We really do appreciate all and any of your feedback. And if you want more information on Dr. Noble's book, which is the subject of today, Betsey Stockton, you can view more information or order it from the web address on the screen there. I will send that link out in the chat momentarily so that you have a live link to it. And then one last thing, just a brief overview of the Zoom dashboard. This is what your dashboard should look like. If you're using a PC or a Mac, your dashboard may look a little bit different, but all of the features will still be there. In the bottom left-hand corner, you can check your audio settings. So if you're using an external listening device, like a headset or earbuds, you can check to make sure it's connected properly there. At any point during the presentation, if you run into any issues, there is a raise hand button here in the middle. You can click on that and that'll alert me. I will send you a message in Zoom and hopefully be able to resolve any problems that you're having. And as I mentioned before, if you do have any questions, there are the Q&A and the chat buttons. You can use either of them, and we'll be happy to address them again at the end of Dr. Noble's presentation. So that is everything that I have for you. So Juliet, take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, everyone who is joining us today. My name is Juliet Poncello, and I work for Thomas Edison State University. In addition, I am one of the co-chairs of the DEIC committee that is associated with the library as well as the university, and I am here with one of my co-chairs, Jennifer Apgar, as well as Christina Wilson. She is, I'm sure, joining us as an attendee. So thank you. I am honored to welcome Dr. Gregory Nobles as our speaker today in celebration of Juneteenth. Dr. Nobles has built an esteemed reputation as a faculty member and now Professor Emeritus of History at Georgia Tech. His research specialty is the history of the United States from the era of the American Revolution to the Civil War. Today, he will be sharing an inspirational story he penned in his most recent book, The Education of Betsey Stockton, An Odyssey of Slavery and Freedom. As Dr. Noble's book describes, Betsey Stockton, as a child, was given as a slave to the household of Reverend Ashbel Green, a prominent pastor and later the president of what is now Princeton University. I look forward, as I'm sure all of our attendees do, to listening to Dr. Nobles describe Princeton's history in the Civil War era by sharing with us the life of Betsey Stockton, who was a much revered figure among Princeton's Black people and a local leader engaged in grassroots business of building support systems for her community on a local, national, and global scale. Thank you and welcome, Dr. Nobles.
Well, thank you, Juliet, and thanks, Jennifer and Andrew as well. And thanks to all of you, really, for being here today. I hope everybody is out of the heat. We are here to commemorate and to celebrate Juneteenth. That's our newest national holiday, and the one honoring that day, June 19th, 1865, when official word of the Emancipation Proclamation finally got to Black people in Texas. Came 2.5 years late, but it came finally. And I'm happy too, especially to be speaking under the auspices of two good Trenton institutions, Thomas Edison State University and the New Jersey State Library. So thanks to both of those. In fact, let me say a word in the beginning of celebration about libraries themselves, not just because they're so valuable to historians like me for our research, but I think that because they're so valuable, frankly, to history, especially the history of Black Americans, people who were so long denied, deprived of basic literacy and books, people for whom the library was not just a source of literacy, but really of liberation, not just a source of education, but emancipation. And today, as we celebrate Juneteenth, we celebrate all the other days and all the other ways that people made themselves free. And one of those ways was simply by going to the library. and I want to underscore how important an institution that is. And I want to underscore how important all library workers here and everywhere are. So thank you for that. Well, today on Juneteenth, let me begin on another June day, this one June 15th, 1860, in Princeton, New Jersey, when a white man named Eli Stonecker came to the house of a Black woman named Betsey Stockton. And we are not advancing the slides.
You just have to share them.
Oh, sorry. Okay, Andrew.
All right, looks
Reaching
good.
out here,
We can see them.
but they're not moving.
Can you hit your PowerPoint icon on the bottom?
Yeah.
Now try.
Okay, there we go. Good, thank you. Okay. Sorry, back we go. The technology has been at least temporarily resolved here. Stonecker was the assistant marshal for the United States Census, and he had a bunch of papers to fill out about each person in the town of Princeton. He had to record everybody's name, age, gender, race, birthplace, occupation, and wealth. And he got 2 cents. He was paid 2 cents for every name he listed, and that's all he got from visiting Betsey Stockton. She was a woman living alone, a household of one. She'd never married or had children. Stonecker listed her age. You can see she's fifth down here on the census sheet as 60 years old, which is close enough. She was probably born in 1798. We're not absolutely sure. He put her race as mulatto, and she was indeed mixed race, although how Stonecker knew that, whether he asked her or whether he just made an observation, we don't really know. He noted her birthplace as Princeton, and that she was born into slavery, although he didn't really note that. He recorded her occupation as teacher. She's the only one listed as teacher in Princeton's Black community. And she owned property worth $400, which puts her really pretty far apart from most other people in the Black community in town. Now, Eli Stonecker had been at this census business for about a week, and he kept at it for another month until July 18th, 1860, when he had everybody counted. 3,723 names in all of Princeton. 621 of those were listed as Black or mulatto. That's about 16% of the town's population. And these were the people I call Betsey Stockton's neighbors, Princeton's Black community. But before I talk about that Black community, I want to talk briefly about Betsey Stockton herself, about her early life before she became a fixture in Princeton, about her early life as a young member of that Black community in Princeton. And she was born in Princeton here at Constitution Hill, the household of Robert Stockton, one of the most prominent men in Princeton and a slaveholder. Betsey's birth mother was probably one of the enslaved people on Stockton's estate. Her birth father was probably one of Stockton's sons. We don't know for sure, but that's been the speculation. But sometime, when Betsey was still a toddler, before 1804, she's taken away from her birth mother and given to Robert Stockton's daughter, Elizabeth Stockton Green, who's living in Philadelphia. She's the wife of the Reverend Ashbel Green, a 1783 graduate of the College of New Jersey, now Princeton, and then pastor of Philadelphia's Second Presbyterian Church, which is probably one of the most prominent churches in Philadelphia. It was a very, very prime post for a young man like Green. And Betsey Stockton was given to him, given as a slave, he said, and therefore she becomes his property. Now, I have to say that Ashbel Green was apparently uncomfortable with that role as slaveholder. He later wrote that, as he said, by my wife and me, Betsey was never intended to be held as a slave. And that was true. Sometime soon after Green's wife died, Elizabeth dies in 1807, Ashbel Green emancipates Betsey Stockton from slavery. I say soon, it might have been as early as 1807, certainly by 1810. But the point is that she is free, but not completely free. She's technically not still enslaved, but as a minor, and she's probably 10 to 12 to 13 years old at this time. She's still indentured as a servant, still in a form of unfreedom, still subject to Asheville Green's authority. And Green very soon exercises that authority. In 1812, he's named president of the College in New Jersey, Princeton, and he takes Betsey with him to Princeton. But then, less than a year later, in 1813, when Betsey's only 15, he sold her. Or technically, he sells 3 years of her time and sent her away to Woodbury, New Jersey, to live under another Presbyterian pastor, Nathaniel Green. Then, the summer of 1816, her time with Nathaniel Todd, is up. She comes back to Princeton, back to Green's household, and she joins Princeton's Presbyterian Church. And here's this extract from the church record from September. Princeton's Presbyterian Church is, I have to say, the church in town. It's where Asheville Green worships. It's where most of the Princeton faculty worship, most of the Princeton student body, and a good number of Black people, both enslaved and free. So now, age 18 or so, Betsey Stockton is deemed to be in good conduct, and the church accepts her as a full member. It says, Betsey Stockton, a woman living in the family of the Reverend Dr. Green, applied for admission to the Lord's table, and they're satisfied to her experience with religion, and they accept her. I will say, too, that this is the first time in any documentary record I'd seen the full name Betsey Stockton. And I think she took the Stockton name for herself, a case of self-naming, which is very common for people who have been formerly enslaved to name themselves, even if after the family name of their enslavement. So Betsey Stockton is back in Princeton in 1816. She's a member of the church. She's living back in Green's household. But here's the larger context there, too. When she comes back to Princeton, she can see this ad in the newspaper. It's another young woman, about her age, is being offered for sale, offered by a member of the Princeton faculty, who is one of Asheville Green's colleagues. Now, I want to pause and note here that slavery was on its way out in New Jersey in the first part of the 19th century, but on its way out slowly and very, very slowly. The state's law for gradual abolition said that anyone born into slavery on or after July 4th, 1804 could be freed, but only after more than 2 decades later. A child born at that time, if a boy could be freed at age 25, a girl at age 21. There was a long time to wait for freedom. Anybody born before July 4th, 1804, as this young woman apparently was, had no legal right to emancipation. And I'll be happy to discuss this whole question of gradual abolition in New Jersey during the Q&A period. But there you are. That's New Jersey. That's Princeton in the 18 teens. That's Princeton when Betsey Stockton was in her teens. And so she can be part of Asheville Green's family. She can be a member of Asheville Green's church. She can sit there in the balcony with other Black people. She can take communion and be a full member. But she also knows the limits. She knows the limits for young Black women in Princeton. And she can see in this particular case what can happen to a young Black woman in Princeton. But Betsey Stockton also knows something else. She knows that she can learn. Now, she never goes to school for a day in her life. Asheville Green never sends her to school. But what Asheville Green does have is a very sizable library. This is in the Princeton's president's house. And in that house, just to the right there, that's Asheville Green's house. He has a very extensive library, and she uses the books in that library to educate herself. And she learns to read, not just the ABCs, not just the 3 R's, but she becomes quite sophisticated in her reading. She has a deep knowledge and gains a deep knowledge of literature and theology. And on the whole, Betsey Stockton seems to have been a very voracious reader. As a young woman, she reads everything she can get her hands on in Green's library. And I argued in my book that she is not just literate, She's actually an intellectual. But she uses her literacy, her intellect, to become committed to the education of other people. She wants to be a teacher. Now, that's fine. That's very benign seeming, I suppose. But it's not so easy, and something I think we can't simply take for granted here. Nobody asked her to become a teacher. Nobody showed her how. Again, she never went to school, never worked with a teacher, never had a role model. And she knew, even as a teenager, that her career options were very, very limited. In Princeton, most Black women worked as domestics, as washerwomen. There were no Black teachers in Princeton at the time, no opportunities for a well-read woman. So in 1822, Betsey Stockton applies to become a missionary. Joining a group of Protestant missionaries under the auspices of the American Board for Commissioners of Foreign Missions, leaving New Haven, Connecticut in November of 1822 and heading to the Sandwich Islands, what's now Hawaii, on a trip that they think will be a one-way trip. They expect to go there, live their lives there, and die in the islands. And this is the move that Betsey Stockton makes. Now, on one level, I think she's seeking a way out. She's seeking a spiritual way out as a missionary. She is a very devout Protestant. But on another level, I think she's seeking a personal, maybe even what we might call a political path. Becoming a missionary is, yes, it's a way out of Princeton. It's a way out of New Jersey. It's a way out of the United States, a way out of the society in which she had been born into slavery. And so she takes this very big, significant, very dramatic move and goes to the Sandwich Islands, Hawaii. She runs a school at Lahaina on the island of Maui for a couple of years. And the story of her life in Hawaii, which is from 1823 to 1825, it's a fascinating story. It's a remarkable journey in life. It's what I call an odyssey, especially for this young woman who's born into slavery. Now, I don't have time to discuss all of her Hawaiian time right now. I'd be happy to if somebody wants to in the Q&A. But 1825, she leaves Hawaii after a couple of years, goes back to America, first to Cooperstown, New York, with some of her fellow missionaries. Then in 1828 to 1830, she goes to Philadelphia, where she runs an infant school for young Black children, ages 3 to 5. And she goes then, after that, back to Cooperstown for a while. And again, it's a remarkable odyssey, a lot of travel, a lot of movement around the world, literally around the world, for this young African-American woman. But then finally, for the last 30 plus years of her life, she goes back to Princeton. Back to where she had been born in 1798, back to where she lived under Asheville Green in the 18 teens, back to where she would live as the unmarried matriarch of Princeton's Black community until the day she dies in October 1865. So, what's to know? What's to know about Betsey Stockton's Princeton from the 1830s to the 1860s? On one level, perhaps like Hawaii, it seemed idyllic on the surface. It's this very bucolic seeming community with a very prominent college, of course. And I think this image here is very instructive. It shows Nassau Hall in the background with a pathway leading out to Nassau Street, where the horses and the people are moving. It's the academic side of town. But if you follow that walkway out of the front of Nassau Hall and straight toward where you see this, you go across Nassau Street, and there that walkway becomes Witherspoon Street, a street that then and now goes into the heart of Princeton's Black community. I sometimes talk of Princeton as a tale of two streets, Nassau Street and Witherspoon Street, the physical intersection of class and race in Princeton. And of course, the college is very prominent, but the college is also a problem, certainly for the members of Princeton's Black community. Princeton, as a college, as an educational institution, had long pursued a Southern strategy for recruitment. The Princeton administrative officials realized they couldn't compete with Harvard and Yale in attracting students from the North. Harvard and Yale were just too prominent, too dominant in that market, as it were. So beginning in the 18th century, under John Witherspoon, one of the 18th century presidents of Princeton, the school looked south for students, and it got them. In fact, in the years before the Civil War, in the antebellum era, about half the students attending Princeton were from below the Mason-Dixon Line. And those Southern students, along with some faculty members also from the South, gave the college what I call a Southern accent of sort. They influenced the political tone of both the college and the community, of the white community, to be sure. And throughout the antebellum era, those white students became a problem for people in the Black community. White students quite often attacked people in the Black community, people who promoted abolition. They also attacked and harassed Black men and women for apparently sometimes no reason at all. And I recount numerous examples of racial violence in the book. And I have to say, quite frankly, it's ugly. But there are other less visible and I think less violent forms of racist behavior in Princeton. I want to point to one in particular. One of the most obvious stemmed from Princeton's Presbyterian Church. And again, this is the church in town. This is the one that Betsey Stockton joined in 1816, the one she returned to in 1833. But within a few years of her return, that church became segregated. And here's how that happened. On July 6th, 1835, the Presbyterian Church, this church burned to the ground. It had been a late 4th of July celebration. A couple of days late, somebody shot a rocket. It landed on the roof of the church. The roof was wooden. It caught fire. The church burned to the ground. And yet, in the process of rebuilding this church, some of the Presbyterian leaders, including several Presbyterian leaders who had come from the South, particularly from Virginia, decided that if they rebuilt a new church, it should be all white. They decided that the Black members of the church, both enslaved and free, should go away, form their own congregation, and be separate. Now, I have to point out the Black Presbyterians never asked for that. They didn't want that. They tried to stay part of the original church, but in the long run, after a rather difficult process, the white Presbyterians prevailed. And so in 1840, some 92 Black Presbyterians from this church, including Betsey Stockton, were pushed out. They formed their own congregation, first called it the First Presbyterian Church of Color, and then in 1848 changed the name to the Witherspoon Street Presbyterian Church, and it's still called that today. It's down on Witherspoon Street, of course. The point, though, this was not a breakaway congregation. The Black people didn't leave the white church because they wanted to. They were a push-away congregation. And yet that congregation, once it was formed, became a critical institution in Princeton's Black community. And it's a congregation in which Betsey Stockton played a very critical role in educating the community. In the 1840s and 50s, she was a key figure in the Witherspoon Street Presbyterian Church Sunday School. Now, I know Sunday school sounds kind of innocuous on the surface, but it's not. It's not. She was not just teaching Bible verses. She and her fellow Sunday school teachers were teaching literacy, that very valuable tool, again, that had been so long denied Black people in Princeton, as frankly elsewhere. And in the long run, she was not just teaching children, but eventually teaching adults as well. What I call spreading the gospel of literacy for the whole Black community. And Betsey Stockton did that on Sunday, but she also did it Monday through Friday as well. She was also the founding teacher of Princeton's one public school for Black children. Now, I have to say, Princeton was a town that celebrated education, at least celebrated education for white people anyway. It had a college, of course. It had private academies, some for boys and some separate ones for girls. It had a number of parochial schools. It had a host of educational institutions. But it didn't have much. It didn't have much in the way of public education for ordinary people. And in the late 1840s, Princeton's local school superintendent noted that the one public school for white children had an on-again, off-again record. It was sometimes open, sometimes closed, usually for the lack of a decent teacher. The black school, by comparison, the one run by Betsey Stockton, was consistently open. And the superintendent said that Betsey Stockton, formerly a missionary to the Sandwich Islands, took good care of that school and frankly made it work. And I note the superintendent talks about her as formerly a missionary to the Sandwich Islands. I think it gives some indication of how long that missionary identity stayed with her, how much it meant, frankly, to people of the white community. Betsey Stockton had some 45 students enrolled, and she taught them the basics. She taught them the 3 R's. But again, I think those 3 R's, the reading, writing, arithmetic, were tools that Black children needed to make it. They needed to survive in a racially hostile environment, in a racially hostile town. And she was the one who gave those young students those tools. And again, the context matters, the racial context in Princeton. In 1858, for instance, the town determines to do better about public education. And so the voters set aside approved funds for public school improvements. They set aside $6,000 to build a new public school for white children. They set aside $50 for Betsey Stockton School for Black children. That is less than 1% of what they provided for the white school. And that was Princeton. That was Princeton on the eve of the Civil War. That was Princeton when Eli Stonecker, the census taker, took the census in 1860. And in 1860, Princeton's Black people did count in that census, at least numerically. And again, there were some 621 of them, about 16% of the town's population. But the one area in which Black people didn't count was the other major governmental activity of that year, and that was, of course, the national election, what turned out to be the election of Abraham Lincoln. Now, Black people in Princeton couldn't vote. Black people in New Jersey couldn't vote. But most white people in the state who did vote didn't vote for Lincoln. Lincoln got just over 48% of the vote, the popular vote in New Jersey. It was the only northern state not to give Lincoln a majority. And in Princeton, he got just 44%, even less. Princeton, I think it's fair to say, is a conservative town in a conservative state at a very critical time in American history. That was Princeton, 1860. Of course, in 1861, Lincoln becomes president, the southern states secede, and the nation goes to war. And so does Princeton. Princeton goes to war. There are emotional scenes taking place on this college campus. Students from North and South saying farewell to each other, sometimes weeping as they do so, but figuring they're going to face each other later on the field of battle. This is their last time, they think, to see each other, perhaps even to see each other alive. Well, that was on the college campus. There was none of that in the Black community. For one thing, Black men couldn't yet fight for the Union. And Black women could make medical supplies and such to send to Union troops, and they did, and Betsey Stockton's church did that. But Black people in Princeton could hear the news. They could hear the news of the war. They could hear the news of national politics. And eventually, in 1862, they could hear the news of Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, which was to take effect on January 1st, 1863. Now I wonder, did Betsey Stockton and her neighbors hold a watch night service on New Year's Eve, 1862, as so many other congregations did, there to spend the night waiting for the proclamation to take effect at the stroke of midnight? I don't know. There's no written record of that, but I would hazard a guess that they did. But along with the Emancipation Proclamation, 1863 also brought other big events to Princeton's Black community. Finally, after several years of delay, in May of 1863, Black men could enlist in the Union Army. There were the creation of regiments of the United States Colored Troops, the USCT, and the records indicated some 50 men from Princeton, 50 Black men, did join USCT units. But I have to say, they could not join military units from New Jersey, because the New Jersey governor at the time, Joel Parker, who was a Princeton grad, class of 1839, refused to authorize Black enlistments. He frankly refused as much as he could to recognize the Emancipation Proclamation. And so Black men from Princeton, Black men from all over New Jersey, had to join USCT units from somewhere else. Most commonly Pennsylvania. In fact, the Pennsylvania 6th Regiment had a number of Princeton soldiers in it. But then, back at home in July of 1863, just after the Battle of Gettysburg, just after the anti-Black so-called draft riots in New York City, Princeton almost had a riot of its own. The rumor was that Irish working men who were unhappy about their draft status threatened to attack and to burn the Black community. They were warned not to by their Catholic priest, Father O'Donnell, who did the right thing. But they were also persuaded not to by the fact that if they had attacked Princeton's Black community, either the people or the property, Princeton's Black people would attack them back. And that realization got their attention. It was a very, very tense moment in July of 1863, and happily it passed, but the hostile sentiment was there, as it had been there for years. And even though in 1864, the voters of Princeton gave Lincoln a razor-thin margin, less than 1% over the required 50, the town remained throughout the Civil War a center of anti-Lincoln, anti-Union activity. And again, it was a very conservative town in a conservative state. Well, the Civil War came to an end, of course, in April of 1865. And a few months later, so did Betsey Stockton's life come to an end. She died in October of 1865. But until then, and this is her last photograph, the only photograph we have of her, taken in 1863, when she was in her early 60s, and I suspect knew that her time was coming. But until that time, she kept doing what she had always done, teaching Black children. She did it almost until the day she died on October 24th, 1865. And people in Princeton, both Black people and white people, praised her. They praised her for what she had done. Her obituary, published in the local paper, said, and I quote, "She had held an important position of usefulness as teacher of a large school for people of her own color in her native town." And now, as we look beyond Princeton, Betsey Stockton's native town, I want to close with one last consideration, one question really. And that is, how do we locate Betsey Stockton in history? Or how do we locate her in historical memory? Now, when I talk about Betsey Stockton, I always try to be clear about where she fits in the larger picture of antebellum activism. She was not an outspoken orator for abolition, like Frederick Douglass. She was not an outspoken promoter of women's rights, like Sojourner Truth. She was not heroic liberator, like Harriet Tubman. And I think it's important. Those three famous figures, among others, moved widely throughout antebellum America. They were everywhere, and they deserved their special places in the pantheon of antebellum protest and resistance. And again, by comparison, Betsey Stockton spent the last half of her life in only one place, in Princeton, New Jersey, doing essentially one thing: helping build and sustain the institutions of the church and the school that helped build and sustain the town's Black community. And she did that day after day, year after year, always in the hostile racial context that pervaded Princeton, pervaded the state of New Jersey, pervaded the North as well as the South. And I think it's always important to understand the racial attitudes that pertained in the North as well as the South. Neither was a place that was very welcoming to Black people. And yet I argue in my book that Betsey Stockton's persistence in Princeton was actually a form of resistance. And my point in the book, and on this Juneteenth, is that that sort of dogged day-to-day grassroots labor needs to be acknowledged, needs to be celebrated, it needs to count in history. And if you go to Princeton today, you'll see that Betsey Stockton is very significant in the town's memory. People in Princeton's Black community have known that for over a century. She has long been a part of that community's memory. This is perhaps the most striking example. This was a stained glass window in the Witherspoon Street Presbyterian Church. It's there now, and it says presented by the scholars of Elizabeth Stockton. And those scholars are the students that she taught in both Sunday school and in the public school in Princeton. This was put there in the 1870s, perhaps 1880s, a decade or so after her death. Also in 1906, the church installed a metal plaque, which happily has been put back, about Betsey Stockton's life, her role both as a missionary in Hawaii, but also about her role as a teacher in Princeton, a powerful influence for good in the community, it says. In 1999, excuse me, the Witherspoon Street Presbyterian Church commissioned this painting of Betsey Stockton in her Hawaiian context, making her look as though she might have looked, although as a much younger woman in Hawaii. This painting now hangs in the Princeton Theological Seminary Library. It's available to be seen now. Also outside the Witherspoon Street Presbyterian Church is this plaque, part of the Women's Heritage Trail, put there in 2004, telling a little bit about the life of Betsey Stockton and providing, again, a marker in front of the church, I think inviting people to come in and have another look around. But in addition to being commemorated in Princeton's Black community, she is also becoming commemorated in the academic community. From 2013 to 2017, and ongoing, the Princeton Slavery Project, which is founded by a Princeton professor, my good colleague Marnie Sandweiss, collected documents and essays to put a focus on race relations in the college and, frankly, in the larger community. It now has some 900 pages of primary documents and essays that are available online, and I urge people to take a look. In 2018, the university established the Elizabeth Betsey Stockton Garden right off Nassau Street in front of the library. I think an important and symbolic place. In 2019, the university also established a plaque to enslaved people who had lived in the old President's House, which is now the Alumni House. And I will point out that the first 9 presidents of Princeton, including Asheville Green, had been slaveholders. And this is the list of the people that they enslaved. And you can see near the bottom the name of Betsey Stockton. In 2020, the Princeton Theological Seminary established the Betsey Stockton Center for Black Church Studies. It's now in operation, doing good work with a very good director, my friend David Lattimore. And in 2022, I published a book on Betsey Stockton. And I think that seeing Betsey Stockton in Princeton really helps us see the larger Black community in Princeton, both past and I think present. And again, she gave the second half of her life to working very doggedly in that community. And I think in turn, Princeton's Black community has given Betsey Stockton life, new life, even after she died. She's very much part of the local memory, very much part of the local culture. And on this Juneteenth, when we think about the significance of that kind of local memory, that kind of local culture, the ongoing work of emancipation, not just in Princeton, but throughout New Jersey, throughout the United States, we have to tell ourselves, yes, it's worth remembering. It's very much worth celebrating. And so on Juneteenth, that's our task before us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Nobles. That was excellent and so interesting to hear the life of Betsey Stockton, the history that you have from her. It's nice to hear how she's being remembered and being honored. I thought it was fascinating to hear her dedication to her students, to her education, the history that she has with the education in Princeton, in the Princeton community, and bringing it over to Hawaii as well. So this was a really interesting discussion. We thank you for joining us. We do have some questions in the chat, so I'm going to start with those. I know you did mention about wanting to elaborate or perhaps talk more about the abolition in New Jersey. So if we have time, I'm going to come back to you on that as well. So I'm going to first start with, was it normal behavior to not be married as a woman or as a slave in that time?
I hesitate to use the term normal. I would say it's exceptional. Betsey Stockton never married. And I speculate in the book, anybody can speculate why that was the case. It might have been a question of her commitment to her spiritual calling. It might have been maybe she just didn't want to be involved with a man in the legal entanglements, emotional entanglements. It could be it was a question of her sexuality. We don't know. She never wrote about that. And I have to say, we don't have much written by Betsey Stockton, except for her journal from going to New Haven to the Sandwich Islands. But no, most women in Princeton, most Black women, were married or had been married. And I think that Betsey Stockton really took on the whole Black community in Princeton as her family. She always lived alone. I think there's only one time you can find in the 1850 census she has a young girl living with her. But otherwise, Betsey Stockton is, as I said earlier, a household of one.
Thank you. Another question that we have is, by the time you were a student at Princeton in the late 1960s, was the Southern component of the student body still noticeable and significant?
I came from Texas. Yes. It was. I don't think quite in the same way. I did not see, I'm happy to say, classmates, fellow students engaging in the kind of violent racist behavior that had been common, fairly common in the 1830s and 1840s. But Princeton has always had a reputation of being a very Southern school, even though it's always called the southernmost school for northernmost school for Southern students. I'm sorry. But I think it's important to point out in the antebellum era, the significance of those students who came from the South, came from slaveholding states, and frankly, slaveholding families.
Thank you. So another question that we have from the chat: why scholars instead of students? Does it relate to her erudition? Well,
it was a term fairly commonly used to refer to students at the time. I mean, I would like to think the term scholars, yes, does refer to the erudition, the academic side, but people really very frequently talked about students and scholars almost interchangeably. And yet I think that using the term scholars does add a bit of seriousness, if you will, to the window. And that is the only time, actually only one of two times I've seen the term Elizabeth used. She's almost always Betsey Stockton. Once she's listed in the 1850s as Elizabeth Stockton in the census, and this other, the window in the Witherspoon Street Presbyterian Church is the other time I've seen it listed as Elizabeth. My sense is that she was always called Betsey, but in this case, the people who put it there wanted to add a level of, I think, additional dignity, I'll say.
Thank you. Another question: Stockton University is not associated with her, correct?
That's right. It's associated with Richard Stockton, one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, a cousin of Robert Stockton. The Stockton family was far and away the biggest, most significant family in Princeton in the 18th and early 19th century. Richard Stockton was, as I said, a signer of the Declaration, a slaveholder. Robert Stockton had been quartermaster for Washington's army during the New Jersey campaign, also a slaveholder. And the Stocktons are a very big and very extensive family. And so the university is named for Richard Stockton because of his connection to the Declaration. I'm assuming not because of his connection to slaveholding.
Thank you. Another one for you. It's surprising that Betsey was laid to rest in Cooperstown, not Princeton. Were her roots in New York stronger than they were in New Jersey?
Well, that's always been a very fascinating issue to me. When Betsey Stockton went away to the Sandwich Islands, to Hawaii, she went with a couple of white Presbyterians, uh, Charles Samuel Stewart and his wife Harriet Stewart. She became very, very close friends with them, very much a member of their family, actually, at least an extended member of the family. She helped deliver two of the Stewart children, one on the boat going to Hawaii, the other one child in Hawaii. And she had this very, very strong, affectionate relationship with the Stewarts, especially with Harriet. Harriet died in 1830. Betsey Stockton came back to Cooperstown to take care of the children, and she came to Princeton with a couple of the Stewart children to enroll them in school. The young boy, Charles Seaforth Stewart, she enrolled at Edgefield. Is it Edgehill Academy? I'm sorry. And so when she died, she wanted to be buried in Cooperstown. And so she was. I think her roots, her connections, her work, her labor, her heart were in Princeton and with members of the Black community. But I think also a piece of her heart lay with the Stewarts in Cooperstown. And I will say happily that for a few years, her tombstone had been knocked over. It was lying in the mud. It was getting grass growing over it until some people at Cooperstown now have propped it up. It's part of the Stewart family plot at the Lakeview Cemetery in Cooperstown. And I think it's yet another memorial to Betsey Stockton that's come about in the last, I'll say, 4 or 5 years.
I'm happy to hear that they restored that and
I am too.
Brought that and cleaned that off. Was she doing missionary work when she was in Cooperstown?
No, she was not doing it. She was living in the Stewart family, helping to take care of the kids, actually. Charles Samuel Stewart, the husband in the family, was out doing missionary work, or at least doing speaking engagements, trying to raise money, trying to raise awareness for the missionary movement. But they had come back from the Sandwich Islands in 1825 because Harriet Stewart had become ill, so ill they thought they had to get her out of there and move her to a cooler climate. And so that's when the Stewarts decided to leave Hawaii, and Betsey Stockton came with them. And I think, again, it's that closeness among those people that is really very striking because, again, it's reaching across the very obvious racial lines.
Thank you. So another question we have from the Q&A. How do you feel about the Woodrow Wilson statue coming down?
The Woodrow Wilson statue in Princeton, or, well, it doesn't matter. I think Wilson has his place as a former president, but I think Wilson's attitudes on race, his behavior, his actions on race when he was president were some that we now find, I think, reprehensible. And I think that when statues come down, whether it's Woodrow Wilson, Robert E. Lee, whoever it might be, one always has to ask, why were they put up? And what's the message that those statues send and to whom? And how can we perhaps use that space differently or put the statues in some other context? And so when statues come down, my response is I think usually there's a time for it, and it's not necessarily completely debasing the subject of the statue, but I think when we celebrate people, and that's what statues do, statues commemorate and celebrate people, and you have to ask, celebrate what, or what about them?
Thank you. From the chat, we have a here on the Wilson statue. So from the chat, we also have would you briefly explain your research process? From your presentation, it was almost as if you knew her personally or had a conversation with her about her life.
When you live with somebody for a long time, even someone in the past, somebody on paper.
Oh, I think we somehow lost your audio, Dr. Nobles. I don't know if that's just me. Oh, there we go. Try again.
Okay, I'll start over.
There we
Just say that when you spend this amount of time really thinking about a person. And when you're trying to figure out what this person is like, and again, as I said, Betsey Stockton herself did not do a big document.
I think we lost you again for a moment.
Okay. I think, are we back in audio land here? Okay.
Yes.
I think that, you know, part of my reading about Stockton and reading about what other people said about her and trying to make sense of what people said gave me, yeah, an ongoing conversation, at least in my head, about Betsey Stockton. And once you've written about somebody, it's hard to let go. And when I finished the book, I thought, well, I guess that's that for Betsey Stockton. But it's not. And that's why here I am today.
Thank you. How long did it take you to write the book?
I think beginning to end, probably I began in, I don't know, October of 2016, and it went to press sometime in 2021. So call it 5 years. And I was very, very fortunate. I have to say this in gratitude to the American Antiquarian Society and the Huntington Library in California that gave me 2 9-month fellowships with nothing else to do but to read and write.
Well, thank you to them for this, because this is excellent information too.
Yes.
Is there any indication that Betsey Stockton inspired the Princeton Black community to join the war effort for the North in the Civil War?
Well, I think they had plenty of inspiration on their own. And again, I think Black people, as we know, wanted to fight. It was a holy cause, certainly by 1863 when they could. You know, I have to imagine, though, that Betsey Stockton, as a teacher, both in Sunday school and the school, and just as a very, very prominent person in the community, and realize the Black community in Princeton geographically is not that big. Princeton itself is not that big when you go up Witherspoon Street. And so I have to imagine just the day-to-day interactions that Betsey Stockton had with everybody in the community, certainly Black people. I think her interactions with young Black people, and in this case, of course, young Black men, you know, I think she had an effect on them. I've not found any document where some person says, oh, I'm going to war because Betsey told me to. I wouldn't expect that. But I do think that the whole cause of emancipation, the whole cause of racial justice in America was spread throughout the Black community in the North. And the fact that some 50 men from Princeton, a pretty big chunk of the town's Black population, enlisted to go to war, tells us that that sense of justice was pervasive throughout the community and is a very prominent voice in that community. I have to believe that Betsey Stockton was part of that.
Thank you. Another question from the Q&A. Did she teach adults?
Yes, she did. She and some other Sunday school teachers started doing what I guess we would call now adult literacy classes at Witherspoon Street Presbyterian Church. And one of the things you can find, and I recommend it if you like, to look at the 1860 census, is the last column over on the far right-hand side of the census sheet. Eli Stonecker recorded who was literate and who was not. And about half the Princeton Black community was not literate. So there's plenty of work for her to do. About half the Irish community in Princeton was not literate. And I think that's a subject of, in the Black community, of racism. In the Irish community, it's xenophobia, class distinctions. But I think the whole question of literacy is a very important one, and certainly it was an unfinished task by the time of the Civil War.
Thank you. We do have a few more questions in the chat as well. I want to pause for a moment to see if you did want to elaborate on the comment that you had made during the session about the abolition in New Jersey, or if you want me to keep going with the questions that are in the chat.
I'll try to be very succinct, and I will note that there's a very fine book by a scholar named James Gigantino, who teaches at the University of Arkansas, called The Ragged Road to Abolition. And it's up to 200 something pages about this process. New Jersey was the last of the northern states to pass any kind of legislation for gradual abolition, and it was gradual. Again, the assumption was that enslaved people, Black enslaved people, were not yet ready for freedom. You couldn't just set them free, and so you had to provide for a period of time where they could be, in a sense, prepared for freedom, and also where the slaveholders could make other kinds of arrangements. And again, as I pointed out, the New Jersey law provided a 25-year time span for the emancipation of young Black men who were born after the right date, 21 years for Black women. That was the legal technicality. What happened in reality was that some slaveholders began to realize, okay, the day's coming. I better do something else now. And I think that may have influenced Ashbel Green's decision to emancipate Betsey Stockton. It wasn't just Christian charity on his part. I think he understood that at some time, even though she didn't technically qualify under the, because she was born before 1804, nonetheless, I think a lot of slaveholders began to realize that there's a certain degree of writing on the wall, and perhaps we ought to make different kinds of arrangements, maybe emancipate enslaved people, but hire them back under indentures. As Gigantino points out, it became a very complicated process in New Jersey and in some other states as well.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to the chat. There are still some more questions coming in. She was only in Maui a short time. What were some of her accomplishments there?
Well, she actually was very significant there. The role of missionaries, of course, was to provide Christian education and to teach literacy. The goal for the missionaries was to teach literacy so people could read the Bible and become Christians, to give up their old religion. But what Betsey Stockton did that nobody else had done before was to teach ordinary people. Most of the missionaries before her, both the first wave that had come in 1820 and the wave she was in that arrived in 1823, initially taught only members of the elite, only the more prominent and prosperous members of the Hawaiian people. Betsey Stockton was the first one to open a school to teach children of anybody, common farmers. And I think that is, it's unclear whether somebody assigned her that task, or, as I prefer to think, Betsey Stockton said, this is what we need to do. She had wanted to teach Black children in Princeton, but of course there are no opportunities for that. And I think she had a very strong sense, a very strong commitment to the education of ordinary people, first in the United States and then in the Sandwich Islands.
Thank you. Another question, why was she photographed? I thought only very rich and powerful people were photographed because it was such a new technology.
It was a new technology, but it was becoming increasingly common. And she and her friend, Charles Samuel Stewart, the man with whom she had gone to Hawaii, apparently both went to New York on the same day to the same studio and got their pictures taken. And Betsey Stockton did engage in another new technology. She had the photograph onto her carte de visite, a little visiting cards you handed out to people. And that was very new at the time, kind of, I won't say high tech, but new tech. And here, a woman in her early 60s, who, as I said, I think probably had the sense, because she was in very uneven health throughout her life. And I think she probably figured that, yes, the time is coming in a couple of years, but happily and fortunately, she did get her image preserved. And so we have it. And that's the only image we have of her. And so what her thinking was, I think probably like a lot of people, it's a sense of trying to preserve oneself in a way and to preserve one's memory, which she certainly has done.
Thank you. I have another question. Did you get a chance to interview any of Stockton's students or relatives?
Well, she had no relatives. again, at least no direct descendants because she was never married, never had kids. Her students would have probably died over a century ago. I mean, her students from when she taught in Princeton. So no, I've not been able to reach anybody that knew her. There are some people in Princeton's Black community, Shirley Satterfield chief among them, who I think carry on the memory and the legacy of Betsey Stockton. I've been very grateful to get to know some of them and to be so generously welcomed at Witherspoon Street Presbyterian Church, where the window is right next to the pews, the plaque is down, and that's, I think, the one place, certainly the main place, where her memory has been preserved over the centuries.
Thank you. I do note that it is 1 o'clock. I don't know whether you're willing to stay on for a few more questions because there are some more in the chat. So if people are willing to stay on as well, I'm happy to continue reading the Q&A. For those who do need to jump off at 1 o'clock, I just want to thank you again, Dr. Nobles,
Sure.
for this wonderful presentation. Thank you to NJSL for Presents for allowing the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Council to be part of this. This was remarkable. We thank you very much. As a reminder, you can learn more about the DEIC through Capitol Campus. You can also view our previous newsletters, upcoming programs, events, current newsletters, and whatnot through Capitol Campus. This program has been recorded. Like I said, I will stay on to continue with the Q&A if you're willing to do so. But this program has been recorded, so you will be getting a recording of that soon. You will also be receiving that survey that Andrew had mentioned in the beginning. We'd love to hear your feedback on this. So thank you everyone who was able to attend. For those who'd like to stay on and continue the Q&A, we'll continue doing that. I just wanted to recap that quickly though, as people were jumping off if they needed to jump off at 1 o'clock. So
thanks to everybody for coming in.
Thank you. So would you like to continue with some of the Q&A?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I'm not sure, this will be recorded again. So if you did have to jump off and your question wasn't answered, this is still being recorded. So I will continue with some of the Q&A. Let me just get back to where I was. We had the photograph question. Okay, here is another one. Can you recommend any resources of diverse historians, academic articles, or videos that cover Betsey's life and this period of history?
Well, having written a book about Betsey Stockton, I suppose it'd be self-serving to recommend that. There's not been a lot written about her. There is another biography by a scholar who lives in Princeton. There's a children's book. There have been a number of scholarly articles in some scholarly journals, Hawaiian history, and quite often in some religiously focused journals. But the scholarly literature on Betsey Stockton is, at least has not been very extensive. I would happily think there's more to come. I don't consider my book to be the only and final word. I would love to see somebody else come in and perhaps even find more documentation that I couldn't find. I always hope that someday a big box of documents will come out of the sky and it'll be Betsey Stockton's writings and her own collection of books. One thing I think is a great loss, frankly, and this is an ancillary comment. When she died, she had a very extensive library in her house, a lot of books. She left her books and papers to her friend Charles Samuel Stewart. And what has become of those books and papers, I don't know. Nobody knows. Nobody can find them. And so I would hope, I've had in my hands one volume, a book that had Betsey Stockton's signature on the flyleaf. It's owned by a rare book dealer in Princeton, Joe Falcone, who very kindly let me hold this book. It was almost a spiritual experience. And yet, as I have said several times, I think when this young woman, and she got the book probably in 1817, 1818, but when you inscribe your name in a book, you're saying, this book is mine. And I think it was an act of possession by a young woman who had been considered a possession herself. And so ownership of that book, taking possession of it, is just one of those moments that gave me only a paragraph in my own book, but gave me just a very strong sense of how important books were to Betsey Stockton as a young woman, and certainly as she became older.
Thank you. And as a children's librarian, I of course had to immediately look up this Betsey Stockton children's book, and I was able to find it. It is Betsey Stockton, The Girl with the Missionary Dream. And it
There
looks
you
really
go.
cute.
That's
I'm gonna
it.
have to
Yeah.
look into
Yeah.
that more. Thank you. So let's see. Where are we with the Q&A? I don't think I asked this one. Clearly bright, devout, hardworking, and community-minded. Is there any additional evidence of Betsey's personality?
The only evidence we have really is the way that she was commemorated. I mentioned the installation of the plaque in the Witherspoon Street Presbyterian Church in 1906, and there was quite a ceremony about that, memorializing Betsey Stockton. And many people, both black and white, talked about what an imposing presence she had. They talked about her as the queen that moved through the black community, that her word was law. That seems a bit strong, I think. But nonetheless, she seems to have had quite a presence about her. And I think, her background as a missionary, even though that was a short period, it stayed with her. And it became kind of her ongoing title as a person. And so I have various times tried to imagine encountering Betsey Stockton. In my own word, I think her voice must have sounded like Odetta, the famous folk singer, and that I could kind of channel Betsey Stockton well that way. But when people talked about her, it was never with disparagement. It was always with remarkable admiration and appreciation.
Thank you. There was another question. Sojourner Truth had the same carte de visite with the photo. Might we imagine they knew each other?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first part of your question.
Sojourner Truth had the same carte de visite with the photo. Might we imagine that they knew each other?
I would love to speculate on that. I would like to think so. Obviously, Sojourner Truth's image has become, frankly, iconic now. Betsey Stockton's less so. I'm not sure that Sojourner Truth ever came to Princeton, even into New Jersey. I know Frederick Douglass did not. I think a lot of Black activists kind of wrote New Jersey off and saying this is not a place we're going to get much success. But you can imagine, and maybe a novelist, a playwright, somebody who deals in a different kind of non-documented work, different from mine, could imagine a visit, a conversation, a meeting, an encounter between Sojourner Truth and Betsey Stockton. And I'd throw in Frederick Douglass too. It'd be a great conversation, a great dinner time conversation.
I feel like that'd be a great question for who would you like to meet, present or previous, that you'd like to have a conversation with. Be a nice little conversation to sit down and chat.
Yeah, sure.
That, I believe, does it for all of the questions. There are many comments in the chat about thanks for the wonderful presentation and books being added to a to-be-read list for the summer. So, and everyone appreciates your presentation, the information you've shared. Again, this has been recorded. So for those who were not able to stay on for the whole time, you can catch up. For those who have stayed, thank you very much. Are there any other, I'll give one last call for questions if there are any more. Otherwise, Andrew, should I turn it over to you?
Sure. Just want to thank everybody for attending. And again, thank you, Dr. Nobles and the Thomas Edison DEI Council for sponsoring this. We appreciate your time and celebrating Juneteenth and continuing to weave the African American story into the greater American story, which is a noble pursuit. So,
and let me say one last word. My gratitude again to the library of the university and to all the people who have hung in for the last hour or so. I appreciate it very, very much. I always enjoy telling the Betsey Stockton story to whomever will listen to it.
Well, we thank you very much. We appreciate you joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thanks.